I was just going to give a little bit of background. I'm Tina Werkmann, the Secretary of the Labour Left Alliance. And the way this discussion has come about is basically the organizing group of the Labour Left Alliance, which is made up of about 40 people from the affiliated local and national organizations, decided that we wanted a single lead statement for our forthcoming conference, to discuss basically some of the challenges that we faced, as well as ideas on how we should organize in future and which issues we should take on in particular, etc. At that organizing group that discussed this issue, 10 people volunteered to be in a working group, which indicates that there's quite a strong feeling on the issue. And it's true, of course, the Labour Left Alliance does not have a very comprehensive political program. This has chiefly got to do with the evolution of the Labour Left Alliance and the groups that were initially involved, but also, of course, with the political challenges that we faced when we were setting up the LLA, chiefly the need to oppose the witch hunt against socialists, left-wingers, and Corbyn supporters, and to bring all those together, all those groups nationally and locally, and individuals, of course, who were prepared to fight this important fight. This is, of course, still ongoing, and we are witnessing in the NEC elections how, let's say, reluctant many of the left-wing candidates are when it comes to fighting openly against the witch hunt. But the defeat of Corbyn and the Corbyn movement, well, Corbyn specifically, but certainly his supporters as well, presents us now with a challenge as well to decide on a way forward politically and a program that goes beyond the witch hunt. So anyway, it transpired pretty quickly that there are big political differences on the organizing group, which is not a problem, I don't think. We're not a sect, and differences and the ability to express them and debate them in a comradely environment are a sign of a healthy organization in my view. And this is one attempt to discuss those differences. So this is how we ended up basically with two lead statements. 2/3 of the organizing group roughly supported version 1, which will be presented here by Dave Hill. About 1/3 supported version 2, which will be presented by Kevin. This debate could also perhaps be called minimum maximum program versus the transitional program. The former being the defining feature of what we could call the Leninist left, the latter perhaps of the Trotskyist left. Maybe that's simplifying it a little bit, though I think that there's a truth to that. At conference, we will also no doubt be discussing how we move forward organizationally. And of course, the program and the organizational structures are very much interlinked, and the issue will probably come up in this debate today as well. And that's not a problem in my view. We are facing quite difficult challenges at the moment. Lots of people are leaving the Labour Party, as everybody here knows, and lots of people are leaving local Labour left groups, and lots of these local groups that make up the LLA have found it difficult to continue meeting, truth be told. Some have stopped meeting altogether, which is also one of the reasons actually we said we wanted to put on a delegate conference to help comrades to start meeting again and to, give them something to fight for, because it has been a very demoralizing period for many of us. But that presents us with certain challenges, if there aren't that many local Labour groups meeting, etc. What does that mean for the LLA as an alliance of such groups? So, there are proposals to move towards a more centralized, a more national organization, which we will certainly come up today as well. So we'll not come to any decisions today, and we don't have to. This will all be discussed at conference in about 2 weeks' time. But at conference, we won't have quite as much time, and it will be a bit more truncated, everything, because of time restrictions. So we said it's a good idea to have a discussion today, perhaps to hear out our arguments in a bit more relaxed way, etc. So we're not going to take any votes or anything like that. we're trying to take, to make this as fair as possible. I think we're trying to have a debate where ideally we have one speaker in favor of version 1, one speaker in favor of version 2. But of course, there will be people who are perhaps in favor of something altogether different. We would encourage you to put forward amendments to either of the lead statements or both. There haven't been that many amendments yet. The deadline for amendments is August the 19th. So we hope this meeting will also go some way to encourage comrades to put forward amendments and to think about some of the ideas in a bit more detail. So if you want to indicate, please click the button that says raise hand. That's under participants. If you click participants on the bottom of your screen, you'll see on the right-hand corner a set of functions, and raise hand would be so that you can participate in the debate. The first speaker to present the version 1, the majority version, let's put it like that, is Dave Hill from Brighton. I'm unmuting you now and spotlight you. Ooh, there you go. You've got about 10-15 minutes. Sorry, I can't hear you. You have to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Yeah, good, yeah. Okay, I want to reiterate something that Tina has just said, that despite the obvious multiplicity of left views within the Labour-Left Alliance, it's been very comradely. I've been very happy at a local level where we have regular meetings in Brighton, about 8 to 10, sometimes more of us, the local organising committee, and then the national meetings that I've been to. I must say, I never ever thought I'd end up defending a minimum programme. I'm a Trotskyist. I actually support a transitional programme. And my branch, Brighton branch, has actually moved an amendment to option 1, statement 1, which I'm going to present. And the amendment toughens it up a bit to make it into a transitional set of demands, right? Okay, so the basic question before us, Labour-Left Alliance, is how do we increase our social weight? How do we increase our capacity for intervention? And in as big a way as possible, it could be minuscule, it could be bigger. How do we intervene and attempt to change the balance of class forces? So how do we strengthen the local Labour Alliance? Well, it's not easy. Are we just talking about numerically? In which case we could just say we're a combination of social democrats and Marxists, etc. But we're not arguing for that, and that's not what we're about. So how do we strengthen LLA ideologically and politically? Do we strengthen it by going for a position which I shall characterise now in the most comradely way possible? I shall characterise statement 2 as actually leading us, if statement 2 is accepted as a majority position, will actually lead us into a sectarian blind alley to the left of most of the sects in outside the Labour Party. Whereas I think we have to recognise that we're in non-revolutionary times at the minute. Of course, our task is to develop revolutionary consciousness, but we live in non-revolutionary times, and a revolutionary programme, such as option 2 is suggesting, I think will cut off tens of thousands of potential recruits, those leftward moving left social democrats within the Labour Party, and those such as many of my comrades in Brighton who've been expelled, suspended, for under investigation, etc. Now, the two programmes, the two political statements, very similar, the context. I don't think any of us is going to talk at great length about the context, about the global context, about the national context, but I will, well, accept that the fact that once again, it's always the poor. I've been very active in international politics. I've been active in revolutionary movements in different countries for various decades. And it's always in England, in Portugal, in Greece, in Ireland, it's always wherever, and Turkey, it's always the workers who pay for the crisis. So that's, we know that that's on the agenda, the austerity compounded by racism, sexism, etc. But I won't talk any more about that context, except to talk about the Labour Party. And here, we're all members of Labour Left Alliance. I think we all agree that the Labour Party is moving rapidly rightwards. We've seen on Labour Left Alliance stuff about the injunction from David Evans, the new Secretary General of the Labour Party, saying that we are not allowed to discuss. We're not allowed to discuss the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. We're not allowed to discuss the Equalities Commission report. We're not allowed to discuss this, that, and the other. In fact, as various comrades, including have stated, including about the Panorama programme and the leaked reports, he's got no power to stop us local branches discussing and passing resolutions critical. My own branch in Brighton, and I think it's had many hundreds of downloads. My own branch in Brighton called upon Labour to reject the IHRA definition and to distance itself, to completely refute the Board of Deputies definitions of what we're allowed to talk about. So there is within the Labour Party an attempt to stifle left debate. Somebody has described it as the reactionary authoritarians of the Labour Party, ultimately defending capital. And of course, that's what social democratic parties do. That's what they've always done. That's what they've done since Bernsteinian revisionism of the late 19th century. The social democrat parties have always been the reserve team of the ruling class. And at various times in history, the left current has raised and then either been expelled or diminished and controlled, and people have left in disgust, etc. So there's no surprise there. But the Labour Left Alliance, I think, has got it right, that we are working within the Labour Party as well as those comrades outside the Labour Party. And a matter of a different resolution, I nearly said revolution, a matter of a different revolution and resolution, I will be proposing, or Brighton branch will be proposing at the National Conference, that we do work with other groups and organisations outside the Labour Party, as well as those comrades inside the Labour Party, as well as Black Lives Matter, as well as Extinction Rebellion, as well as trade unions, etc. The criticism of Labour, should we leave or not, and many people who say we should, and I think we should not yet. The criticism is that Labour and social democratic parties can never be one for socialism. That's not historically totally true. I mean, you can all fall on the floor laughing if you want when I mention Syriza, but we've seen social democrat parties throughout Europe PASOKified, diminished, almost wiped out. And in some cases, like Syriza, there's others, Podemos, Linke, etc. We've seen that the left can take over. And had it not been for Tsipras's decision in 2015, then the main party getting over 30% of the vote was one to could have pushed forward a revolutionary situation. I was involved in that. I was there for a number of years for some time, a few weeks a year, and it was a pre-revolutionary situation, destroyed by the leadership of the party which replaced the Social Democratic Party. But it was not necessarily, it wasn't a necessity for Tsipras to have taken the capitulationist route instead of the revolutionary route. What is our task? What is our task? I'm a revolutionary Marxist, I'm a Trotskyist, I'm working within the Labour Party and without. What is our task? Well, our task is to develop class consciousness. That's what Marx wrote in the manifesto, Communist Manifesto, that's the main task of communists. And in Gramsci's terms, our task is to develop good sense instead of what might be termed common sense. That is the taking for granted what the newspapers push out and what your granny says. I want to end up by looking at the different positions that Tina mentioned. Tina mentioned, and these positions, the three positions, minimalist, maximalist, transitional programs, and they each have tactical ramifications as well. These three positions have been, it wasn't Trotsky who invented them, those terms. I mean, these terms were talked about in 1921, in the 1920s, the Comintern discussions. The minimum program, which is results, which is, I suppose, and I hate to say this, and I wish it was stronger, and I will accept, if my branch allows me, it will allow me to, an amendment to firm it up into a transitional program. But Proposition 1 is left social democratic program. It is the Corbynite program. As such, it is appealing and will not rebuff, will not put off, to repeat a phrase I've used twice already, the leftward moving, the left social democrats in the Labour Party. So that's the minimum program. Then we've got the maximum program, which, again, is it rude for me to mention this? Lenin wrote Left-Wing Communism and Infantile Disorder. And I think that that's what the Proposition 2 is. I really think that's what Proposition 2 is. And Trotsky also criticise maximalist demands. Of course, whatever Lenin says or Trotsky says or whatever did change according to the particular situation at the minute to an extent. But I think the main criticism I have, and the main criticism, not just me, but other comrades speaking at the recent National Organised OG meeting, is that it's way in front. Option 2, we're leaders. The word vanguard is not very popular, but we are politically experienced. We learn, of course, from each other. We learn from the 20-year-old, 50-year-old people who've never been on a demo before. Of course, it's a dialectical process. But we learn. But how far in front do we get? Do we get so far in front that if we turn round, there's nobody behind us? We can't see them. We're too distant. Or do we stay in touch and all the time, seek to push people to the left, seek to use this party, this LLA, this Labour Left Alliance, and whatever other fora we engage in, trade unions, etc. We seek the opportunities for political socialist education. I think my 15 minutes is probably up. I urge you to support Proposition 1. I'm looking forward to the debate. Bound to be loads of points that none of us have heard before. So thank you for not throwing any rotten tomatoes so far.
Thank you, comrade. So the rest of the format of this meeting we're suggesting is that Kevin now has similarly 10-15 minutes. I think that was about 12 minutes that Dave spoke. Then Daniel Platts will second version 1, and then Stan Keable will second version 2 for about 5 minutes each, and then we open up for a wider discussion in this meeting. So, Kevin, I'm going to spotlight you now. Hello.
Okay, thanks, Tina, and thanks, Dave, for your opening comments. I think that if you look very carefully at the two versions, you'll see that they have a set of common elements in them, and as Dave and Tina have explained in various ways, they arose out of a discussion in the organising group, and indeed there are sections which are essentially the same, but they do diverge, and they do diverge considerably. I think Tina was also correct to raise some questions of socialist and revolutionary history about the derivations of the different programs. Since I'm speaking from the minority, I think I should really be mentioned potentially, Dave, rather than a maximalist, but I'm quite happy to take that title.
Sorry,
I think that
a bit of crackling in your microphone. Yeah. I'm gonna, if I make you smaller, maybe it goes better. Try now. Try speaking now. I'm not quite sure what it is. Gone.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I think this is better already. Yep.
Okay, maybe I was moving around too much. So I began by explaining about the origins and the similarities of sections of the two statements. And I think they both have a common origin in an attempt to deal with the crisis of the Labour left that Dave has outlined. And they also, I think, deal with, or they attempt to discuss the problem of Corbynism. And I think one of the things that many of us who've been around the Labour movement for quite a long time, but maybe had been less active in recent years, but had been drawn back into activity by what we might call the Corbyn movement, the Corbyn moment, was that we saw perhaps a new type of movement, and many of us, I think, initially were quite optimistic about how it might develop. Indeed, if you think about it, the growth of the left as party members, probably one of the most left-wing leaders that Labour had ever had, certainly one that had a record of opposing many of the pro-capitalist and pro-imperialist policies of the party. So we should have really have been set fair for you know, quite a significant move to the left. Now that didn't happen, and I think we've attempted to discuss why that didn't happen, why, for example, Corbyn didn't do better, and in particular, why we're now in a period of what seems almost like a counter-revolution. It's almost a thermidor in which the rabid rights of, the rabid armies of Starmer supporters are expelling people left, right, and centre. And I think that we need perhaps to understand why that's happened, but more importantly, how we react to it. And I think it does lie in our understanding of the left and our understanding of socialism. And I'm sure that Dave and I and many other comrades who are probably going to disagree this evening will say that we have a similar definition of socialism ultimately. But what we will start to disagree with is how we want to achieve that. And secondly, the level of consciousness required to reach that. Now, Dave's already indicated that problem in terms of maximalism and in terms of being too far ahead of the class. But I think the example of Corbynism shows that the left in the Labour Party had, I think, a very imperfect grasp both of the nature of the Labour Party, and indeed the nature of socialism and the things that were required to fight for that. We know, for example, that the Labour left, whether that be the very weak parliamentary left, but also the Labour left in the constituencies, either did not take the fight to the right wing, or more importantly, when the reaction began, kept their heads down. And that the really important issues of taking that fight to the right, particularly in terms of democratizing the party, in terms of really purging the right wing, the sort of adopting the same sort of approach that they are now adopting towards us. We didn't do that. We failed on open selection. We failed on getting new MPs. We failed in a whole number of areas. And indeed, I think that the failure of Corbynism was not simply the failure of Corbyn as a man, as a figure, but was actually a failure of a movement, and more importantly, the failure of a type of conception of social democracy. In my talks on the history of the Labour Party, and particularly the Labour left, I've been trying to, explain what I think the role of the Labour Party is in Britain. And again, I think Dave and I would have, many areas of agreement on that, particularly in terms of its role as a capitalist second 11, and particularly in the way that the Labour left fails historically ever to challenge that dominance. But I want to, you know, perhaps explain why I think that occurs, and then try and link it to the sort of program that I've put forward in statement 2. I think the failure is not just simply one of individual cowardice or hesitation or betrayal. That sort of narrative, you know, is fairly common on the left. I think it's more structural in terms of people's politics, and much of it in terms of the Labour left is a reliance on electoralism. I'm not here advocating opposition to participation in parliamentary politics or elections or anything of that sort. But what I am arguing is that the emphasis on getting Labour governments and seeing socialism and the development of socialism as a product of a series of incremental advances by Labour governments. And that would be the dominant view of many people on the Labour left, particularly the idea of preserving party unity, the idea of trying to keep the coalition together. Now, I'm not saying that Dave advocates that. What I am arguing, though, is that that is I think the predominant historical position of the Labour left, that it's quite prepared to take the battle up to a particular limit and then no further. Now, this programme, and indeed the type of conception of socialism I'm arguing for, maximalist as it may be, is really completely at variance with that. And it's the idea of socialism as the product of a self-consciously organised working class. And Dave made the very important point about hegemony and about consciousness, because my conception of socialism, the rule by the working class, and a rule that can only really take place internationally, again, I'm sure we're all agreed in the impossibility of socialism in one country, and we are all very familiar with the experience of the Russian Revolution and the international labour movement in the 20th century. So those would be areas of agreement. But what we're talking about is raising and developing a particular type of working class consciousness, a consciousness which is actually talking about working class rule and socialist transformation. So the question is, how do we get that? You know, do we campaign around a series of reforms? And this is where Dave's point about transitional politics is interesting, particularly as references to the early conferences of the Comintern. Do we get that by raising a set of demands which incrementally raise consciousness, particularly in trade union forms? Or do we argue that for the working class to take power, it has to be conscious of its rule and its potential to rule over society in Britain and internationally? That's why political demands, particularly about the nature of the state, political demands around democracy, are in fact quite important. And indeed, those demands which throw up the nature of the state, about who rules in Britain, about who controls society, I think are really quite central. So the issues of prime ministerial power, the issues of the armed forces, they're all, I think, you know, really very significant issues. And again, they're largely ignored by people on the Labour left. Jeremy Corbyn, when he was a backbencher in the 1990s, put his name to a Commonwealth of Britain bill, which called for the abolition of the monarchy in the House of Lords. I think there were 12 MPs who put it forward. But when he became the party leader, that type of constitutional and indeed wider political agenda was put to one side. And again, I think we see some of the failures of the Labour left in not really confronting and understanding those questions. So the state, the nature of the state, and in particular the role that it will play in attempting to prevent working class advance, its role as an organ of class power can't really be ignored. And again, that's an area that the Labour left historically has played has not really got involved with, or has regarded it as purely a ceremonial issue. So I think that again is quite an important area of difference in our programs. The other area that I'd like to draw attention to is also perhaps the wider nature of our crisis. And this is not just the crisis of the Labour left, and both Tina and Dave, I think, have outlined some of the problems that we've all had. I think it's the wider economic crisis that we now face. And the transitional demands, which Leon Trotsky began to advance in the late 1930s, emerged out of one of the most calamitous periods in 20th century history, the run-up to the Second World War, the triumph of fascism in Germany and Italy, and of course the world slump and the crisis of capitalism. Now, we're facing, I think, not a similar period in the depth, I think, of say, the issues of fascism and the possibilities of world war of that character, but we're certainly into a very deep capitalist crisis. And that means that our politics, I think, have to really present quite a fundamental alternative. And they have to be based not on left social democracy. They can't be based upon forms of left Keynesianism, no matter how reforming. They have to be based upon the fundamental nature of capitalism in crisis. And in particular, the fact that capitalism as a system globally is in a period, I suppose, and has been really since the First World War, the early 20th century, in a period of almost terminal crisis. Now, the point about crisis is that it's not a final crisis. You know, comrades will be very well aware that socialists, both during and after the two world wars in the 20th century, expected revolutionary movements to develop, and indeed in various forms they did. But what was missing in those various revolutionary periods were, of course, revolutionary leaders and parties and movements to any extent that could, you know, could take advantage of those situations. Dave refers to the early period of the Communist International and talks about the discussions there. And it's interesting because I've just been rereading that period in, you know, quite minute detail. And one of the contributors to the debate, comrades may be interested to know, was one Joseph Vaughan, who was, at the time he was speaking at the Comintern conference, mayor of Bethnal Green. He was a member of had formerly been a member of the British Socialist Party. He was by that point a member of the Communist Party, and he intervened in the discussion to criticise Radek's assessment of the British communists. Now, what's interesting about Comrade Vaughan is I thought he must just be some rather eccentric character who'd sort of been thrown up. You know, Mayor of Bethnal Green speaks at Communist International Conference, but he's part of a whole layer of working class militants. He was in the ETU, and indeed he continued to be a member of the ETU into the 1930s. He continued to be active in the Labour Party. Indeed, he stood as a Labour candidate in the general election. And he, you know, like many other people, was finally expelled from the Labour Party. But he kept, you know, fighting within the Labour movement for the ideas of communism, the ideas of Marxism. Now, why I think Vaughan's interesting, apart from the fact that, you know, the idea of the mayor of Bethnal Green, perhaps without his chain speaking in Moscow, does appeal to me, is it shows the point is that any Marxist movement, any real movement for socialist change in Britain has to take account of the Labour Party. And we had a golden opportunity, I think, in the last few years to develop a genuine left wing in the Labour Party. Now, you know, all of us, I think, wasted that chance in various ways. And I think one of the ways that we wasted it was that we did not only take the fight to the right wing, but also that our program was in many ways not firm enough, was not clearly socialist, and indeed was not clearly designed to raise both the consciousness of our own left wing activists, but the wider class. So my arguments really go back to those two things: the importance of remaining within the Labour Party, of building and you know, trying to defend the rights of the left inside that party, but also trying to build a partyist project, which is one that's based around the ideas of socialist transformation as the conscious act of the working class, and one that requires that class to become hegemonic in society. Oh, my apologies, too excited. Well, it's talking about Joe Vaughan, it always does this to me. But it obviously does require really quite a radical break with, I think, the previous Labour left, and indeed much of the politics of the Labour left. But I'm sure that will come out in the discussion. I hope, comrades, I've not gone over my time too much.
Slightly, that's why I was doing this thing.
I
Raised my hands, but
Entschuldigen.
Thanks very much, Kevin. I was going to say something briefly, not on the discussion, but something that Dave brought up, that comrades will have seen that email by David Evans, as Dave said, trying to tell us we're not allowed to discuss various issues. And Dave quite rightly points out he can't forbid this. And if you read the email carefully, he also doesn't do it. It's the same formulation that Jemmy Formby used when she tried to stop branches and CLPs from discussing motions in support of Chris Williamson, saying, this is not competent business for branches and CLPs. Does not mean you can't discuss it. In fact, you should try and discuss it, because if we stay in the Labour Party, the reason to stay in now is to fight back against the witch hunt with renewed vigor, etc. So nobody will get into trouble for trying to move motions on this issue. It's not prohibited. It's just not competent business. The worst that can happen is the chair is trying to rule it out of order, or even if it goes through, and we've seen that with Chris Williamson, is the NEC or the General Secretary will not read it. So what? It's not for them, is it? It's for us. It's for showing we're standing up and we're not taking it. So don't be cowed by this email. It's very important we do not get intimidated. I see the Squawk Box had an article today saying we're being banned, which is idiotic. It's not true. There's no ban. So I'd like to take in Daniel Platts now for 5 minutes to sort of second the version 1 motion. And then after that for 5 minutes, Dan Keable, and then we can open it up to the floor, so to speak. Dan, fire away.
Thanks, Tina. Thanks to Dave and Kevin for excellent introductions there. So for me, there is loads in common between the two statements, and I don't think we actually really needed to have two separate statements, but as we're all so busy, we didn't quite get organised enough to give us enough time to get them together. And there are lots of commonalities, like, we talk about capitalism in crisis globally, COVID, about capitalism making the working class pay, the changing landscape since the election, Starmer's reactionary role to move the party to the right to suit the establishment, the timid approach from the Socialist Campaign Group and others on the left, the demoralisation and loss of party members, and the failure of appeasement. They both talk about breaking with reformism and about fighting for international socialism, which is the rule of the working class. And I think they both contain transitional demands too. Now, the differences I see are that version 1 will better connect with the current consciousness of the majority of the working class and the party membership we're trying to support and work with and organise. Whereas version 2 includes, well, first of all, it includes this thing at the end about the OG changing the constitution, which I think is a bit cheeky to crowbar that in, which is basically an endorsement of the Labour Party Marxist rule change motion. But anyway, I think version 2 is likely to be unrelatable to many of those people we're trying to connect to by talking about things like stateless, classless, moneyless society, abolition of the monarchy, things like that. I think it's just a little bit too abstract for what we're trying to do. We're organising the left. The LLA is not here to recruit to a revolutionary organisation. Others are doing that, some quite well. I mean, I support socialist appeal, but I'm not in LLA for that purpose. I'm in it to work with good local comrades who want to change the party, the Labour Party, and to work with good comrades on a national level to help coordinate similar groups of comrades across the country to be more effective in changing the party, such as the work we're doing on the NEC elections now. So I believe, even though there are many in Labour Left Alliance that believe in a Marxist vision, and you know, I agree with basically the sort of vision that is in version 2. I just don't think the LLA is trying to achieve what's in version 2 directly, rather than the LLA seeking to achieve international socialism, i.e. the end game. We're seeking to win a very crucial battle within that overall struggle. You know, to make the working class the driving force of the Labour Party, you know, by democratising it, by promoting socialist ideas, of course, in the process. And you know, I don't even mind calling certain radical progressive reforms socialist policies. You know, ultimately, you have to win what you can for the working class in the period between what we have now and what we might eventually start calling, you know, socialist government. But the struggle won't end until there's global socialism. You know, the LLA needs to build support among the working class, you know, many of which they were happy to just get Brexit done just to mix things up a bit because they're so pissed off with the state of things. So at this stage, talking about a moneyless society, when many are stressed or much worse, depressed, or you know, failing families, or you know, debt, or you know, poor health, or whatever, precisely because they have no money, you know, I think it's unlikely to be effective. Many will even get angry, I think, at such sort of what they might see as sort of fanciful musings by what they might see as privileged academics or something. And you do see that accusation thrown around, you know, people going for this sort of radical, progressive, like the manifestos, they're all just, you know, middle-class liberals. And of course, obviously a lot of them are, but, you know, just because you're trying to strive for something progressive, seeking equality for the working class, doesn't mean we're all liberal utopians. But I think some people might look at version 2 and think it's a bit utopian, despite the fact I don't agree it is. So, I mean, those in deprived areas that have lost community services, lost public services or access to them, they've lost the decent jobs, to connect with them and good lefties in the party that might not yet be solid socialists, I think we must be talking about what was good in the last 5 years, you know, the progressive policies. So, you know, well-paid, secure employment, the NHS, National Care Service, National Education Service, housing, better retirement, renewables to protect the environment, less war, you know, but those things are in version 2, but just slightly worded slightly differently. I think wording it in a particular way might connect better with people that looked at the manifesto of the last 2 elections and were encouraged and enthused by it. But we must be honest about social reforms like these only being a fraction of what socialism will offer. You know, it's only temporary relief for working people. But the fight for such reforms still remains vital, or we risk failing the working class. So we need people to stay in the party, resist Starmer backtracking to the right, and use his backtracking to show it does not represent the working class. Pressure the left to tackle the witch hunt, obviously. Fight for democracy with open selection and joint left slates, things like that. We need to be building local groups, seeking affiliations, seeking unity and collaboration, diplomatic while we're doing it. And we need to move some focus to trade unions and beyond, because there's going to be bigger struggles, you know, on the industrial front and outside it. And continue our excellent education programme. But we need to win the working class with radical policies in the here and now, while promoting socialism, encouraging education on the history of the movement, the defeats and the victories that are possible based on our tactics. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you very much. I see in the chat that some comrades are having problems finding the raise hand button. You could also indicate in the chat to me if you want to speak, or just do that and I'll try and whiz through. But there's 2 pages on my screen, so I can't see you all. Ideally, so few people have managed now to find it. So it's under participant at the bottom of your screen. If you click participants on the right, some options show up where you can. Amongst them is the raise hand, a little blue hand, like you should see on the right-hand side. 3 people have got their hand up. Okay, Stan Keable, please, to second, so to speak, version 2.
Yep, unmute myself, that's good. Okay, yes, see what I can do in 5 minutes or so. Let me see. I just want to touch on version 2 first, to be positive. I should say, I mean, the comments about comradely discussion are good. I agree with that, but of course that includes being forthright and telling home truths, okay? What you do to your friends is speak the truth to them, so forgive me. Yeah, in version 2, it's undoubtedly meant to be a Marxist program. I know Corbyn gets called a Marxist. Anybody that's half decent on the left gets called a Marxist. You might as well come out with it and say, yes, that means me, and then we'll talk about what it means. Because denying it, of course, doesn't help. They call you it anyway. It's called red baiting, isn't it? In version 2, you've got a crisis, as you got in version 1, but in version 2, it's a crisis of capitalism. So we're squarely on that. And what I say to Labour Party comrades in Hammersmith when I meet them, say, are you a socialist? And they hesitate. They go, all right, yes. And then you say, do you want to get rid of capitalism? They say, oh, no, right? That's the kind of socialism we've got in the Labour Party. In this item 3, or paragraph 3 of version 2, it says, the necessity of replacing the rule of the capitalist class with world socialism, the rule of the working class, which can then start the transition to a stateless, classless, moneyless society, where the principle is from each according to their ability to each according to their needs. That's what we call a vision of socialism, isn't it? And there's nothing wrong with putting that in front of the working class. Now we've got paragraph 4 of version 2. Corbynism was a failure, a self-defeating illusion. The illusion was that for the many, not the few, could be delivered within capitalism. It can't, and it's actually dishonest to present that to the working class, as was done, and pretend that with the capitalist state intact, you can get all those nice things that are in the popular manifesto. Left-right unity, right? That was a self-defeating illusion that we want left-right unity, that we could get it. Instead, we got appeasement and complicity, actually, from the left, from those on the left who joined in the witch hunt, like Landsman, like Momentum, like even McDonnell joined in the witch hunt. That's complicity in the witch hunt. Diane Abbott, Bell Ribeiro, Addy, when they were confronted by Starmer, you mustn't go in the same meeting with people like me, or Jackie Walker, or Tony Greenstein. They were present in the same meeting. Then they capitulated and said, okay, we won't do it again, sorry. And the campaign group of socialist MPs, as they call themselves, they only come out in defence of Rebecca Long Bailey. And when they do that, they're campaigning for unity with the right. They're saying, please, Starmer, you're spoiling your image of party unity. You said you were going to campaign for party unity. Here we are, we love you. You want to kill us, but we love you. That's what they say. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Now, the political program we're putting forward is a democratic program, which is what's necessary to get working class rule. It's actually not a socialist program in the sense of the immediate demands. What we're called immediate demands, the minimum program, not minimalist, that's the wrong word, minimum program in a minimum maximum sense, is what Marxists always did from the German Social Democratic Party, guided by Engels. And then that was the model of the Second International, the Socialist International. That's the one that the Russian Social Democrats, Bolshevik and Menshevik, both tried to emulate in Russia. That's the one that Lenin supported all the way through. That's the Marxist program, minimum, maximum. And nothing wrong with that. That's the way to get majority working class rule. And it involves, as it's listed in version 2, it involves dealing with the monarchy, the House of Lords, having MPs on an ordinary wage, workers' skilled wage instead of overpaid. We fought for payment for parliamentarians so you get working class candidates. That's what the Labour Party did early on. And that's important, but having them overpaid like they are, no, it's beyond the power. Presidential Prime Minister, we don't want that. Somebody gets to be Prime Minister and gives away all the jobs. Abolish the police and the army, because you need a people's militia under local democracy. We need local democracy extended vastly, devolution. And that includes policing, right? It includes that the policing should be under a people's militia, not the police, which is separate and against us. Secret state's got to be abolished. The Church of England should be made equal to other religions. So it's no longer the state church. And then we need to deal with the democratic question of Scotland and Wales and Ireland, a federal democratic republic of England, Scotland and Wales. So they do have, Scotland and Wales do have a right of separation if they want. We don't want that, but we want them to have the right to it, and so on. And there is an amendment to ours as well. We've got a Labour Party Marxist amendment to extend that democratic programme into social demands and so on, including migrant rights. When you look at the other one, I can see strangely in the version 2, I see the word socialist and socialist programme. And I think I counted 8 times in 15 paragraphs. Clear socialist alternative, it says, but I didn't find out what it was. It criticises Starmer for an alternative which is within capitalism. And then it's got in item 5, international socialist programme. Well, good, but where is it? And then it's got item 6, paragraph 6, socialist programme, socialism as the rule of the working class. Yes, that's right. But how do you get it? Where's the programme? Manifestos, it says we must be honest, paragraph 7. Well, you're not being honest, right? Saying, I believe in communism, classless, stateless, moneyless society. I'm not going to tell you about it, working class activists. You've got to learn the hard way by struggling for achievable demands while we don't tell you where we're trying to lead you. Right? That's dishonest, okay? Stay in the Labour Party, good, important site of struggle for socialist politics. Well, yes, firm socialist principles in paragraph 9. Paragraph 10, a clear socialist and democratic platform. Where the hell is it? Right, it's in volume 2, in version 2, isn't it? It's not in version 1. Dave's quite right to disown it and say, well, it needs to be strengthened because it's actually a reformist, sub-reformist, left social democratic programme. Overturn this rotten system. It's in paragraph 15 of version 1. Well, good. And at the end, it says, and to fight for 3 guesses. Socialism. But what is it? Okay, well, it is higher up in the, it's just let in at one place as the rule of the working class. And that's in version 1 as well. So the question is, how do you get there? And to get there, you have to go to version 2, I'm afraid. Okay, that's where it is. Then we got another, if I can diverge a little bit onto the transitional methods. In motion 4.5, I think I might have enough time. Ineffective consensus unity. This is what volume 4.5 from Brighton is about. It's about a kind of unity which is not based on principle. It's like this picture. This is your chimera. Have a look at your screen now. There's unity of the Antarctica kind, where all different groups with all different politics get in the same room. In Britain, it's Left Unity Group, isn't it? Which is a bankrupt, failed project for left unity. It's got a good name, Left Unity, but it means unprincipled left unity. That's what they want. They're in it, okay? Don't do it, okay? Don't do it. The way we get big is by being good on principle and then building strong organisation from it. In the 4.5 motion, it's got the majority must not dominate. Right, bureaucratic steps will be taken to make sure this is undemocratic. Of course, the majority should dominate. That's how we go. We don't go by vetoes, do we? We go by majority votes. And this actually is an entryist, or rather an exitist perspective that Dave has put forward in the Brighton 4.5 motion, because it talks about this is not an attempt to move on from Labour at this stage. In other words, later we're going to split to the left. No, we want to be campaigning for the right to split. We're going to kick them out, and we want the Labour Party to become, in the words of the aims of Labour Party Marxists, which you can find online on our website, the purpose, the perspective for the Labour Party is a united front, a permanent united front of all of the working class, all trade unions, all socialist groups in. Okay, that's it. And we're against vetoes. The reason you misrepresent the Socialist Alliance, the Socialist Party withdrew because it wasn't given a veto, not because the SWP had a veto. They were bigger. Socialist Party walked out because they were not allowed to have a veto. We had majority rule in the Socialist Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. Okay, we've had a few comrades indicating. I'm trying to take them in some kind of political order where I can guess where people stand, so that we have a bit of a varied discussion. Steve Freeman, please, first. Where are you?
Here I am, Tina. Thank you. I've just got to unmute myself first of all.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got two sets of comments. And basically, I'm supporting version 2, but I have some disagreements with version 2. But if I look at version 2, it's basically it's essentially a Democratic and Republican program, but then it's got attacked onto it, you know, the ideas of world communism, or I mean, I should see where that is in there, but it attaches itself to communistic and international socialism. You can have a Republican program that's not attached to socialism, or you can, or it can be, or you can see it as transitional one to the other. But as a Republican program, it's not something that would necessarily alienate the Labour Party. I mean, forget about the specific demands in it. 25% of people in this country in favour of a republic. I think probably the majority of people in the Labour Party probably sympathetic to the idea of having a republic, and certainly Tony Benn was, because he produced a bill on it. And Corbyn himself was, although he dropped it as soon as he became the Labour leader. So I don't think there's any reason for thinking a Republican programme will piss everybody off in the Labour Party. It's radical, but it wouldn't necessarily alienate people. It can be if you write it in, you know, particularly alienating ways. You can write something that's basically sound and write it in a way that pisses people off. But you can basically have a Republican programme which you could which the Labour Party could be wanted. The problem with Corbynism was it wasn't a Republican programme. All he was really promising to do was to mend the broken social monarchy that was established after 1945. Which is essentially, we keep the constitutional monarchy and we have a mixed economy and a welfare state. That was the 1945 Labour government. And most of the left in England uses that as its reference point. And if you want to know what that means in modern terms, you've got to look back to version 1, because version 1 gives us the Corbyn programme there. I can't see, I'm right in front of me. Gives us the Corbyn programme there in what it says in paragraph, where is it? Paragraph 7. In section 7. That's essentially the Corbyn programme. To restore the social monarchy, that's different from a Republican programme, which you could argue is a minimum programme, by the way. I think it has to be Republican to be minimum in the context that the Bolsheviks used it. But that's only one problem. We need a Democratic and Republican programme, but that links to the second point, which is about the nature of the period that we're now living through. We're not living through a time where we can simply reset the clock back to 1945 and make an updated version of it. The political system that we've got in this country is literally falling apart. Just look at the numbers. Why is it that we've got the worst death rates in Europe? Why is it we've got the deepest recession in the whole of the G7? Why are we the fattest country, by the way, and just about the fattest country in terms of obesity and the rest of it? All these factors show that Britain stands out as a particularly bankrupt and broken society. And the Labour and the right, by the way, have understood this. So they've been using democratic slogans because of this crisis of democracy. They've been using democratic slogans. Take back control was one. Get Brexit done. They're all promoting the idea that the right in this country is interested in democracy because our democracy isn't working for the people of this country. But the left isn't doing anything about it. It's ignoring the democratic question. So if we look to Dave's, the first programme, see what it says there in 5. Because it says, I looked at 5 carefully, it says we want to fight for a socialist programme, okay? Then it says, and democracy in society. So the first one wants to fight for democracy in society. And then its third bit is fight for democracy in the Labour Party. So it's got 3 elements. Now, one of those elements, when we talk about the socialist programme, later on it says it's an international socialist programme. And I think Stan's already said, well, there isn't any real international socialist programme there. And then when you look to what is this fight for democracy, it's at the end, it says the LLA must continue to fight for full party democracy, free speech, mandatory reselection of sovereignty of party competency. That's fine. That's democracy in the Labour Party. But where is the democracy in society? Where are the democratic demands in programme number 1? It's because most of the Labour left thinks the democratic questions are irrelevant. They've not understood the political system of this country is now completely bankrupt, and it's very dangerous because out of that you can get fascism. You can get degeneration and fascism. So we face a situation where if you don't deal with the crisis of democracy in this country, the alienated working class will turn to fascism as seeming to give it an alternative. So I think it's not just some abstract discussion about the kind of, what's the name of the program, transitional minimum, whatever. It's actually about the crisis of democracy that now exists in this country, that the Tories are part of, and it has to be addressed. And unfortunately, Programme 1 talks about fighting for democracy in society, but has no content to that whatsoever. I mean, this is, Stan said it was okay to be a little bit rude. I mean, this is probably the worst con since Dominic Cummings went off to Bernard Castle to have his eyes tested. Because there's nothing in there which is about democracy. And if we don't seize that moment, then wait out for the right and the fascist right to make advances. That's why English nationalism is going now, by the way, has risen and has become a factor in our society. Nobody's dealing with the English question, by the way. And this doesn't do that. I'll stop there, but I think just to sum up 2 points. We need a Republican programme. If you strip out all the references to communism, a Republican programme, you can unite the forces in the left of the Labour Party around republicanism, because Tony Benn was doing that a long time ago. And secondly, it's necessary for the nature of the period this country is now in. Our constitution, our democracy is absolutely busted, it's bankrupted, it's corrupted, and everybody knows that. That's why 46,000, or somebody said 62,000 people died in this country, the worst in Europe. How's that come about? Because it's not because capitalism's made that happen. It's because the state is bankrupt, completely and utterly bankrupt. And we're sitting through this coronavirus crisis, watching a bankrupted state failing in front of our eyes. And therefore we have to address the bankruptcy of the state. And the only one that's trying to do something about that, and I've got some disagreements with it, is programme number 2.
Thank you, Steve. Does any of the people who have got their hand up want to speak in favor of version 1? I know Ken and Kevin probably support version 2. What about Anthony and Marion? Are you supporting 1 or 2? Because I would want to get a bit of variety in there. Sorry, I can't hear you what you're saying. Maybe you can do this or this. 1 or 2?
I'm not. No, I haven't read either of them. But going on the discussion, I probably go more towards number 2. But
okay, I'd like if anybody would like to speak in favor of version 1 now, can they indicate, please? Ian, did you want to speak in favor of version 1? Where are you, Ian? Ian Drummond. Version 1 or 2? Can you show me on the screen 1 or 2, or say it?
Please.
Which one?
1.
Okay, then I'll bring you in now.
1.
Yeah, gotcha.
Wow. Wow, straight on.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to speak in version 1. Let me see if that might be better.
Say again?
No, I was just adjusting the screen. I've raised my hand a second ago. So yeah, I think version 1 is better. I think version 2 has a lot in it that's good, and solidarity to Kevin over the witch hunt that you're facing, and I really liked all your educationals. I don't know if you're now facing that witch hunt partly because your educationals were so good, but nonetheless I have to support option 1. I think option 2 sort of reminds me in some of the demands of a pretty naughty leaflet that Nigel Farage put out in the early days of Corbynism. On the one side it said obviously vote UKIP, on the other side it said Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, abolishing the monarchy, abolishing the armed forces, giving away the Falklands and stuff, all things that were never obviously Labour policy, and things that were calculated to put off workers in, say, the Red Wall areas that now especially we need to win back. And it's a shame because there are popular demands arising organically out of the movements now that come quite close to some of the more contentious parts of option 2. Instead of saying abolishing the police, defunding the police has become a very serious mass demand in the United States and to an extent here. Instead of saying abolishing the armed forces, cut spending on wars to spend on the NHS is a demand that's emerged from the anti-war movement here over the last 20 years. So there's ways of phrasing it to not, as Dave said very eloquently at the start, not be so far ahead of the class that when you turn around you can't see anyone. I also think that naming and shaming Diane and Bell in particular in version 2 is a big mistake. It sort of plays into the hands of everyone who says that the Labour Left Alliance are too negative, let's not engage with them, and they don't engage with us and all that kind of thing. I think the truth is Diane and Bell were under a huge amount of pressure, a huge amount of attack. We might have preferred them to come out all guns blazing more than they did, but it's certainly not the worst example of things that have happened from the left, never mind the right, in the Labour Party over the last few years or even over the last few weeks and months. Maybe it just happened to be what was the latest saga when the version was being written. And now even a few weeks later, there's so much more that could have been put in terms of recent news events in the Labour Party situation. So I think that's quite unfortunate that those are the only 2 people who are attacked. And I don't think any such figures on the left should be personally named and shamed like that. We can put forward different politics to versions of the left that haven't done so well rather than that. I might make an exception for John Landsman, I don't know. But even with his record, it's probably more about the politics than about the individuals. So I think option 1 is the better way to go. Maybe we'll see what happens with different amendments to both at the conference. But I think, as Dave said at the start, you have to have a relationship with actual real struggles that are going on in society now, and those 2 examples come to mind in terms of how it could be phrased. I think much differently and better in terms of police and army, maybe not as radical in the immediate term, but things that actually masses of people are calling for, and Keir Starmer's on the defensive and not calling for. And I think that's where we have to go. And it doesn't say make all the mistakes of Corbyn. It says fight for these things without sacrificing them all to have unity with the right. So I think that's the fundamental difference. Not that the problem with Corbyn wasn't that he didn't put the full communist programme. The problem was that the very good programme that he did have in the original election of 2015 got successively degraded and watered down by the perceived need for party unity with people who never ever reciprocated. And those are the lessons I think we have to learn going forwards. So I'll shut up and go.
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks.
Okay. Yes, we're running a little bit, not late, but, you know, I think if we stick to 3 minutes now per speaker, that would sort us out, okay. I think Marion should come in now. I'm going to spotlight you.
Yeah, I think it's quite an important debate, this. And for me, the question of fighting for democracy, and that for me does mean fighting for a republic and to fight against the royal prerogative. And a lot on the left for some time haven't taken that as seriously as we need to. But we are in a global crisis on every level that you can think of, economic, health, the whole lot. And I think, for me as well, the important thing is, if we don't start raising some of the issues, large layers of the working class feel totally disenfranchised. That's why you had the red wall falling. That for a long time they felt nobody was speaking for them or giving them a voice. And unless we tackle some of those kind of issues and raise our demands in a way that can talk to people, the other question we have to ask actually is, who are we talking to? Who is our programme for? What is our audience? Because I don't think it's totally clear from what I've heard tonight. As I say, I haven't had a chance to read both documents yet. I will do. But I think the key thing for me is one of the strongest weaknesses, I think, was a capitulation to of landsmen and others in the name of party unity. That's what has led to a lot, because the right will never unify with the left, not the Blairite, because they're the bourgeois force, pure and simple. So I think the key thing is we have to fight for democracy, not just in the Labour Party, but in society in general. And we need to put forward our demands in a clear and concise way. And I think that, for me, is the key thing. And if we don't take on things like the royal prerogative, if we don't take the role of the state and that seriously enough, we're not preparing for the battle that we're gonna confront. Because it's crystal clear, if Corbyn had got elected, then there would have been they would have gone probably for a coup. We shouldn't forget that. So we have to be prepared for that. But the key thing is we have to also think about how we talk. And I also agree that we shouldn't be attacking people like Diane Abbott and other people. We would have wanted them to do something, but we shouldn't personalise it. You don't know the amount of pressure that these people have been under. Now they should, you know, hopefully we would all be better than that and stand up and still be prepared to talk to people. But I don't believe in naming and shaming either. So I don't think that should be the tone of the document we're putting forward. And I think the key thing is we need to fight and get what are we trying to achieve? The key thing is, I think one of the reasons it's interesting how Starmer's doing it and the new General Secretary are doing it. They're trying to enforce their will in a way. In a way, Corbyn and that they were too soft. They were too soft in the sense that they didn't take over. They allowed those I don't know what to call them, those people that have since had a settlement that actually worked against getting a Labour government. They allowed them to stay in position. Well, that's one lesson you've got to learn. You can't allow that layer of people to be in position to deliberately undermine what you're trying to do. So it's a bit confused. I'm not confused. I'm not really expressing myself, but I definitely think the fight for democracy and democratising the state is important that we have that argument out.
Thanks, comrade. I'm going to do this now. After 3 minutes, I'm just going to put everything on gallery view again, so the shock will make you quiet because your 3 minutes are up. Thank you, Marion. I hope that comrades consider putting amendments forward. There are a few pre-conference meetings still coming up, and hopefully a national one. We should organize another national one as well, where comrades can put that forward and where additional delegates can also be voted through. Carol, please, has a question, I think. Where are you, Carol?
Yes,
There you are.
I'm here. Yes, I really have a question. By the way, Marion, I thought your speech was great. I was putting my thumbs up there all over the place. But my question is, I think people are a bit frightened about version 2 because it's going into the unknown. You know, we don't know how this new society is actually going to work in practical ways. And I think if we could explain to people how it's going to work, how life is going to be for the ordinary working man and woman, what is it going to look like? And I think if we can do that, we can then win people over to those ideas. Because at the moment, all we've got to go on is the failed experiments of Russia and China and North Korea. And if people look at those, then obviously they're very frightened of what's gone on there. So I think what we have to do, and what my question is, how do we represent what this new society is actually going to look like? How is it going to work for the ordinary man and woman?
Thank you, comrade. Okay, Alec Price, please. I think it's in favor of version 1. Where are you, Alec? That's the problem with these meeting formats. Found you. There you go.
Right. Thanks, Tina. Yeah, I'm generally more in favour of option 1. It's not all to do with like you know, the exact wording on everything, but it's to do with the method, really. I think we need to get a few things straight, really. The first thing is that capitalism, what we mean by that is the economic system that is based on making private profit off the backs of workers. That's what capitalism is at a very generic level, at a fundamental level. So when we're saying getting rid of capitalism, that's what we're talking about getting rid of. And obviously that means all the terrible things that flow from that, like, you know, homeless people dying on the street while people have, you know, mansions and all that sort of stuff. Socialism is the next stage of society after capitalism. It's one that, rather than based on private profit, is based on social need. And for that to happen, rather than the capitalists being the ruling class, the profit makers, you actually put the workers as the new sort of ruling class, if you like. It's where the working majority actually own and run and democratically plan and control the economy in the needs of the majority. At a fundamental level, that's what socialism is. And all the good things that can flow from that, whether it's everyone's got a house to live in, secure job and wage, the levels of crime that will come down because people aren't living in poverty and squalor, all that sort of stuff can flow from this changed economy. But the key to this is the working class. You're not going to have a society where workers run the world and the country if the workers don't fight for that and organise for it and take power. So really what these two different positions are, they're different methods of trying to get the working class to take power so we can have a socialist society rather than a capitalist society. And throughout the history of capitalism and the workers' movements, there's basically been 3 trends which have developed as general methods of leading the struggle. Number 1 is reformism, which is represented very well by a lot of the trade union leaders, by people like Momentum, Corbyn to a certain extent as well. They're people that want to change things bit by bit, hope no one sort of notices it too much, and gradually and slowly you sort of slide into socialism. And the problem with that is the world doesn't work in that nice, smooth way. It's a very bumpy ride, the class struggle. And as we saw when, for example, we wanted open selection, and I wrote the motion on that and went to conference, and we had this big push in, this big force saying we want open selection. The reformist leadership, it was too quick for them. They thought, oh, it's going to get out of control. And so they actually became quite conservative and ended up blocking the movement in the form of open selection and going for reform the trigger ballot instead. So reformism, we've lived through a bit of a failure of reformism very, very recently. Now, the opposite side of the coin to reformism, and I'll try and be as quick as I can, is what I call ultra-leftism. And that is where you think, oh, inherent in reformism is betrayal. We've seen all this betrayal. What we need now is just pure socialism, end capitalism now. And you end up with something a bit like version statement 2. And the problem with that is, if it's the working class that are the agents of change, they need to be fully on board and support what you're saying. If you go too far too soon, you end up being so far ahead of the class, they don't really hear what you're saying. They don't really get what you're talking about. And if you're in that position, then actually you've isolated yourself, and it means you're easy pickings then for the establishment to sort you out, and you don't have that working class base to back you up. So finally, the third method, and I think this is the only method that has got any chance of having proper leadership and success, is what's called the transitional method. What that basically means is you fight for all the reforms that you can get, but unlike the reformists, you're not limited to that. You put forward demands which speak to working class people, whether it's on wage rises like the 15% for the NHS workers now or whatever. But you put forward these demands which actually, in practice, the capitalist class is going to vehemently oppose. And during that living dynamic process of the workers fighting for what on the surface is a very reasonable demand, but which to the capitalist class represents a threat to their profits and a threat to their system, the resulting kind of battle and movement of those two forces will lead people, if they're given the right transitional leadership, to say, look, capitalism's saying it can't afford this very reasonable demand you've got for your wage rise, or for, you know, there to be no homeless people, or, you know, for the climate not to end up destroying itself. Therefore, the issue is actually the system of capitalism. And if we want these very reasonable demands, it has to go hand in hand with getting rid of capitalism. And in that way, it becomes a lot clearer to working class people how socialism is actually practical and relevant to what we're doing. So it's about a living struggle. You can't just...
Can you wind up now, Alec, please?
Yeah, okay, I'll end there then. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, the next person is Ken, please.
Thank you, Tina. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm speaking in favour of statement 2 because it seems to me that in the present situation where you have COVID, where you have a global climate crisis, it is the time for a genuine radical change. And if we don't have the courage to present such a programme now, then we frankly never will. And I want to pick out 3 of the areas where statement 2 is allegedly too controversial or too extreme. Those areas are the monarchy, the police, and the Church of England. Well, the monarchy, there's a great sentimental attachment to the present Queen at the moment. But when she goes, and I do not wish this on her, what will we be left with? Prince Andrew, Harry and Meghan, the rest of them? They're a much less appealing bunch, and that might be the moment to actually persuade people to get rid of this ancient, irrelevant burden on the Treasury. So I think now is the moment to talk about abolishing the monarchy. The police, well, the police's reputation has very much gone downhill given what's happened around Black Lives Matter and a number of other areas where police incompetence and corruption has been exposed. So again, maybe it is the moment to take that step. And finally, and it's perhaps less relevant and less important to a number of those listening, the Church of England. It happens that I am a member of the Church of England. Would I be troubled by disestablishment? Absolutely not. I and many others in my congregation would be delighted if the Church of England was separated from the state, because that union has not done the church, in our view, any good at all. But I will spare the comrades the theological basis for that argument and leave it to the rest of the audience to make their contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. That was very succinct and very, very good. Okay, next person, Liv, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Okay. I will also be succinct, I think. I would vote for the option 2. However, I will speak against both of them in the sense that I think neither 1 or 2 it will be acceptable to the Labour Party, and I think it's highly likely that either of them would be viewed probably as a means of setting up a new witch hunt to get rid of all LLA members from the Labour Party. That's my opinion of both of them. I would also say that I think the language of both of them is a problem if we're actually looking out to the wider audience. So i.e. not just to us as socialists and Marxists. We need to find a narrative that actually connects with people. I would say, and on that theme, I think one of the reasons that, Corbyn did so well was that he used slogans for the many, not the few. And we have a rigged, broken system. These slogans really connected with people because there clearly is a whole groundswell of people out there who want radical change. And there's no one who's voicing that now. And in some ways, you could actually argue that the working class are ahead of where the left is at the moment. When you look at what Extinction Rebellion have been doing, and when you look at Black Lives Matter as well, as others have said already, with Black Lives Matter calling for defunding of the police, and also pulling down that statue in Bristol. I mean, you do not hear anyone on the left calling for any of these things, yeah? With Extinction Rebellion, again, when you look at what they have done in bringing London to a standstill, occupying Marble Arch, Oxford Circus, Piccadilly Circus, etc., we shouldn't ignore the achievements that they have made in a very short space of time. They have mobilized a lot of people, young, middle-aged and old, and also different classes. It is a mostly middle-class movement, I would say. However, there are a lot of working-class people in there as well. And they are talking about people's assemblies as a way forward. Well, they are talking about bringing the government down. Neither of those groups, Black Lives Matter or Extinction Rebellion, have a clear political philosophy, no. But they are taking direct action. They, I feel, are expressing that huge feeling for change, for radical change. And the need for it is clearly, extremely clear. Faced with climate change, it's going to take real radical action. So I think we on the left should be looking at working with these groups. They clearly have the ability to connect with a lot of people in a way that, if we're honest, we on the left have not. We haven't, managed to mobilize people to the extent that they have done. So I think, we could learn from them. Clearly they can learn from us as well, because they have no end goal. They don't understand the nature of the state. As Kevin was saying earlier, this is actually really key to any movement that's looking for radical change. And I think a lot of people, whether it's working class, middle class, whoever, people that consider themselves to be socialists as well, there's a real lack of understanding about what the state is. And I think that's largely, or to a large part, it's because people have seen the state as a force for good in the world, because they've seen the state as giving them council housing, giving them the National Health Service, giving them social security benefits, etc., etc. And so people, or a lot, certainly with older people, they still have that view of the state. It hasn't really, I don't think, fundamentally changed. And so I think that one of the things that we could do when we look at the narrative that we use is just maybe spend a bit more time thinking, how can we put that explanation across? Particularly if we are going to work with the groups who are active, Black Lives Matter, Extinction Rebellion, but also all those groups who are active with renters and the homeless, because this is another big group who are taking direct action on the streets, and they are not being led by the Labour Party, they're not being led by anyone on the left. So you can see already there are groups of people in society, they are taking things into their own hands. Surely, we should be recognising that and working with them. They've got the energy, they understand the need for change, they don't have the political, philosophical understanding. That you learn through struggle. And also, if you've got people to help you working alongside you.
Okay, thank you,
I think I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Thank you, Liv. I'm going to bring in Kevin and then Daniel, who both want to come back in. Please.
Sorry, Tina, is this the final summing up?
No, we've got a bit more time. Do it maybe 3 minutes or something, yeah?
Okay, fine. Okay, just a couple of points. Some quite interesting points have come up in the discussion and on the chat threads and so on. I think there are 2 points I would emphasize. First of all is this idea of understanding the period that we're in. And it's clear that business as usual and all the usual patterns of parliamentary politics and indeed of life, both in this country and indeed, globally, is under, severe stress. It's not just, I think, the COVID-19 situation, but the nature of capitalism and all the sorts of political developments that both version 1 and version 2 have thrown up. So I think that any politics, as Ken has said, has to really take that into account. And simply going back to either the 1945 Labour programme or indeed arguing that the Corbyn programme, which was a form of left Keynesianism, is sufficient, I think, in this period, is clearly wrong. And I think, therefore, ideas of a much more radical and indeed the ideas of the socialist transformation of society are very important. I think really the debate is one that has gone on in the socialist movement, really, I think, since the 19th century. And I think that it reminds me of a lot of discussions I would have had, over the years with people who accused me of being too left-wing, that people wouldn't listen to it, too extreme, and indeed positing a very low level of consciousness. And of course, we've all been young once. Some of us are nearer to being young than others, but we all remember the attempts that we might have had to persuade people of the need for the socialist transformation of society. Some of us may have done it by trying to sell papers outside of workplaces, or trying to persuade our friends to come along to meetings, and so on. So I think we're all aware of the difficulties, and we're all aware of the problem of establishing, a counter common sense that was referred to earlier. But I think we have to do it. And I think one of the reasons why is not to argue that we have to sort of start with the basic level of program and build that incrementally. I don't think the current situation allows us to do that, if that was indeed the way that things work. Because we've had a long history on the left of attempting that approach. And because the final goal, and indeed the nature of that final goal, has often been obscured by reformists, again, I would agree with that. But because we on the left have, for example, failed to understand both the nature of the state, we on the Labour left, I mean, failed to clarify the issue of the state. But also, I think, in establishing the link between our immediate demands, our demands on the constitution or our economic demands, and the way that those can be achieved through the socialist transformation. So that basic problem, which comrades have alluded to, I mean, I think has been there. I don't think that we should be as cautious, and indeed we should not accept that working class people, and indeed the mass of the population, will always, for example, rely on their level of consciousness. We all know that historically there have been revolutionary periods. We also know that consciousness can change, but the only way that it can actually change is when we argue for that. And when we don't argue for that, when we argue for limited reforms, as most people do on the Labour left, then all that we will end up with is, in a sense, reinforcing not only the disillusion that sets in when those reforms are not capable of being delivered, but we actually close off that consciousness, which, as Alex said, we need if the working class is to become the ruling class, if we are to build socialism. I think it was Marion who asked, who we'll be talking to. Now, I think at the moment on the left that we are primarily trying to consolidate the left. And we're doing that because we need to develop a left-wing project that can go out and consolidate support in the working class. So from that point of view, this statement is geared very much to left-wing activists. It's not initially, in terms of the explanations and so on, it's not geared to people who are not currently, say, involved in the Labour movement. But the point is, it would be quite capable, I think, of developing a programme around those democratic issues, but also about showing the connections between people's everyday lives and the need to transform society. A number of comrades said earlier about, people at the moment who are, undergoing crisis, furlough, low pay, and the idea of moneyless society would seem an abstraction to them. Well, the point is that if we simply limit our demands to trying to make this system work better, those abstractions will be around capitalism. They won't be really around socialism. This system is in really quite serious crisis, and we have to propose an alternative to that. And I think that's the way that we work. We're in favour of struggling for reforms. We're in favour of day-to-day struggles. We all take part in them. I don't stand aside from those struggles, but what I attempt to do in my workplace or, in my Labour Party meetings is to try to link those struggles to the wider transformation of society. So I think the debate has really posed that very well. And I think that's really where the debate should begin and go forward to the conference. Anyway, that's my comments for the minute.
Thanks, Kevin. Dan, please, as well, for about 4 or 5 minutes. And then later, I suggest I bring in Stan and Dave to sum up version 1 and 2.
Thank you. Again, I think the statements and comrades here are mostly in agreement. And for me, the main differences are simply a few terms like moneyless, classless society, abolition of police and army. I mean, people might think, well, how am I going to buy food and who's going to protect us? Without digging deeper into that sort of thing, that's what I mean by it being abstract, those particular sorts of things. And I don't disagree at all with talking about those sorts of things in our educational webinars. I mean, I think they're crucial. I think education is key. But you know, this sort of fear about who's going to protect us, when am I going to get my, how am I going to buy my food? I mean, the ruling class is quite good at instilling a sense of insecurity and fear in people, so that they're the first sort of concerns that they have. But for me, this is about what the LLA stands for in the eyes of those we wish to recruit as like signatories or affiliates to work with in the Labour Party and the trade unions and beyond, but also in the eyes of the wider working class too. And we must connect with them now. You know, how do we take on the right in practical terms, and how do we improve the lives of many as soon as possible? Now, there seems to be an accusation that version 1 is dishonest. No, absolutely not in my eyes. It's version 1 is about relating to people with concrete needs in the here and now. You know, it states the importance of, you know, highlighting the limits of reformism and how reformism as a sort of approach, as a philosophy, is a failure. It's not endorsing reformism at all, but it's not against reforms. You know, you can't be, the two things can work together. You shouldn't be against reforms, because the working class need reforms in the here and now. And every time the ruling class say no to reasonable, but you know, relatively radical reforms that have been discussed in the last few years, they are particularly the opportunities to promote socialism in more depth. You know, people learn from those events, and they open their minds to bigger ideas, and they can really get into the nitty-gritty of socialism. But for me, this statement is about the LLA and what they're doing now. Yeah, you've got to know your audience, and you adapt to your audience. And I'm not saying, you know, in conversations with people, you don't dare talk about socialism in detail, or communism. You know, that sort of more long-term vision. You know, you adapt to your audience. I mean, for want of a better analogy, you know, somebody struggling with arithmetic doesn't need a conversation about algebra. You know, you fight for and win them a calculator now and show them, here, that's how you add up the cost of your bills. But then you can explain, but actually, you know, there's this thing, a laptop, you can do even greater things with that, you know. So, you know, the arithmetic's the radical reforms, the laptop is socialism. You could say the Starship Enterprise is communism, you know, but you don't start the conversation talking about spaceships. You know, you have to connect with what's important and concrete to the people you're talking to in the here and now. So, you know, you can further promote the more detailed ideas of socialism and Marxism once we've connected and gained their support and started working with these people while we're winning concrete improvements in their livelihoods. And for me, that's what version 2 is about. Sorry, that's what version 1's about, not version 2.
Thank you, comrade. Okay, I've got a few more people indicating. I was just going to say, if you want to consider an amendment and your group doesn't meet, please go on the LLA Facebook group and try and get 9 other signatories to support your amendment. That's another way to get an amendment through. Supported by 10 signatories of the LLA, that will be accepted, which might be the easiest way actually to go about it.
Yeah. I was going to pick in version 1 for version 1, but as the debate went on, I gradually moved in favour of version 2. And what did it for me was, I think, really the comment that Steve Freeman made about, you know, given about how we're governed and everything like that. And I'm thinking about the Red Wall. And I think for some people, I think the question would be a matter of representation. Because at the moment, Scotland have got their own parliament, Wales have got an assembly, and Northern Ireland had an assembly. But the question of England isn't actually dealt with. And admittedly, when I first saw version 2, I was also guilty of thinking that some of it was a bit abstract, but in a funny kind of, but really I think, if I may use the expression, you've got to basically kill two birds with one stone, as it were. You've got to deal with the way we're governed, as well as making the demands that we want to make as socialists. And if you've got a royal family poaching around, you know, whatever happens, they're going to be in the way. Nothing gets them as individual, but it's part of the system. And so you've got to deal with that, but also we need an element of federalism so that individual parts of the United Kingdom can make their own decisions in a democratic way, you know, and I think maybe it's a bit patronising to think, well, that, you know, this is all a bit abstract. And I think Liv made the point that actually, that, you know, there were many people that are quite a bit further ahead than what many of us might think. So as the night went on, I gradually moved more and more to version 2. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, comrade. Okay, I suggest to bring in Dave now in support of version 1, and then Stan as the final speaker in support of version 2. I think it's been a very interesting discussion, actually. I'll make you bigger now. There you go.
I've lost myself. I don't mean my mind, I mean my vision.
There you are. You can see
okay,
you.
well, all I can do is see myself at the minute. I like to see people I'm talking to, but that's my problem with, yeah. Okay, so I'll conclude then. Thank you for the debate, thoroughly enjoyed it. Very useful, and I'm going to take Stan's advice and do some straight talking. So I think we've got a straight choice. Do we want to attract and relate to people who might join us? Do we want to attract and relate to them? Version 1. Or do we want to repel and bemuse potential new members? Because that's the choice. If we go for version 2, I would think that there would be people in LLA leave. And I would think there would be a minuscule percentage of those leaving the Labour Party, or those still in the Labour Party, would be interested. And I'm interested in effective politics. Been in politics since I was 16, and it's to get things done. It's not to show, and I'm not accusing anyone of this, but it's not to show how much I understand earlier debates in Marxist history, or to show how left-wing I am. And I'm not applying that to anyone, but politics is about trying to change things. And I have great aspirations for Labour Left Alliance. I may be silly, I suffer from over-optimism, but I hope that we're going to get, you know, we could get 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, and it could be, who knows, it could be that we, in conjunction with other forces on the Marxist, the socialist, and the leftwards moving, left social democratic left, we could become hegemonic within the left anyway. Make a couple of other points. Beliefs, yeah, I'm a communist. I believe in communism from each according to his or her ability, etc., etc. So I've got no problems with the ultimate aims of Resolution 1. No problem at all. I've fought general elections on behalf of TAF on the basis of a workers' MP on a workers' wage. Quite happy with abolishing the monarchy, the police, blah, blah, blah. for reasons, you know, Marx wrote about it in the Civil War in France, blah, blah. Yeah. But the question is, it's not a question of beliefs. It's a question is, what is the right strategy? And Alec Price said it perfectly. He looked at the distinction that Lenin made, that Marx made, between socialism and communism. Communism comes after socialism. I think Pam Bromley made a very good point when she said the working class gains consciousness through the battle for achievable goals. And that's right. I mean, in Brighton recently, we had an achievable goal. We had big demonstrations in support of national health nurses. You try calling a demonstration to abolish the police. There'll be a difference in turnout. So a key question, and again, I'm speaking plainly, Stan invited us to, do we want a pure and purist rump, or do we want a growing movement? And I'll end up by quoting what two people said. Actually, Daniel made a couple of really good points. And he said in the chat, actually, we fight for what the working class needs and can achieve in the here and now. We fight for reforms while providing education. Education in movement, in battle, in discussions about what comes next. You can't jump from here to there in one jump. And Daniel also ended with a very important point, that statement one, which incidentally, to repeat, Brighton and Hove have offered a stronger version of, which I'm just going to put on chat, but making it a transitional program, a tougher program, but not a maximalist program. So what I was going to say, Daniel made the point that we are not endorsing reformism. To support reforms, achievable, understandable reforms, is not the same as supporting reformism. We use the tactic of the transitional program. We use that tactic to educate, to lead, and then to develop amongst a cadre, amongst a vanguard, and then hopefully amongst masses, understanding that what a communist, a very different society is. So, comrades, in conclusion, do we want to grow as a party, or do we want to become a small, infantile, disordered, ultra-left rump? And I enjoy working with all of you. Thank you.
Put it like that, Dave. I don't know. No. Yes, I don't think version 2 has been written with the aim of repelling people or bemusing them. But anyway, I'm keeping out of it. I'm the chair. I'm bringing in Stan now for a few minutes.
Yeah. Yes, I've got bits of paper all over the desk. So we're snatching at this and that. Reformism. Corbynism, unfortunately, was not reformism. It's sub-reformism. What we had, what the Labour Party used to be, what the reformists were in the Labour Party, leading the Labour Party, if you like, after World War I and all that period and right through to 1945 and so on, they used to talk about the vision of socialism. What they would do is be reformist in practice and socialism on Sunday, right? Just for talking about. And that's not, you know, that is not the way to win reforms, actually. That's the way not to win them. The time when the capitalist class has to give reforms is when the working class is strong and actually is threatening them, threatening their power. When they feel threatened, there's no limit to what concessions they would give to save their system and save their rule. right? So you have to get it in perspective. The best way to fight for reforms is through revolutionary type of struggle, right? When the working class is threatening revolution, then you get concessions and reforms in a big way, of course. So certainly version 2 is not against reforms. We're in favour of succeeding in getting reforms. Daniel, unfortunately, is guilty, I'm afraid, Daniel, of wanting to jump, right? Because I know the accusation is against version 2, that we want to jump straight to communism. No. But jumping straight to, you know, we've got to succeed in defending working class people now, right? That's what you're saying. We must do that. We must fight for reforms. So forget about the long-term platform. That's not the way to win the reforms, okay? I'm saying it's a false path. But what we've got is we can combine the inspiration of that capitalism is not the only answer. Thatcher was wrong, wasn't he? Tina, wasn't it? There is no alternative. That's wrong. There is an alternative. And if we're not going to say it, we're really losing out a good point, aren't we? We've got to say this capitalism is bullshit. You know, it can be replaced. This is what we replace it with. Now, I want to put the word transition into the right perspective. The transition that we should understand is the long, slow transition from working class power on a world scale to communism, to classless, moneyless, stateless society. The state withers away, Lenin wrote in the State and Revolution, didn't he? He was building on Marx's stuff, his critique of the Gotha program, talking about the slow process, the long-term process. That's a transition from capitalism to communism. Can't be done instantly. It's got to be gradual. The first step is working class power, and it is on a world scale because capitalism has brought the world together. It's socialized production on a world scale. You can't take it apart. The answer is that the working class has to take over and run production on a world scale, not dismantle it. So we're talking about revolutionary struggle that will lead to working class power instead of what we've got now, which is capitalist class power. We must put that perspective before the working class. Now, consciousness. Comrades have been asking, well, things that they should know better. You know, if you're Marxist, and several people have claimed that, Dave is certainly saying it, you know that class consciousness doesn't come purely from the experience of the working class. Right? The job of the working class, in terms of its historical role as understood by Marxism, is that the working class is the only class capable, because it's a product of capital. Capitalism doesn't just create more capital, it also creates more workers. Capitalism creates its own gravediggers, you know the slogan. Capitalism creates the working class. The working class is the only thing that can overthrow it. The overthrow is written into version 1, but it's got to be the working class that does it. And to do that, the working class has to understand and learn the politics of all classes in society, because it's got to lead them all. That's why it's got to lead the struggle for democracy. It's got to lead the struggle for freedom, for free speech, for example. It's got to lead the struggle of all classes, right? In order to lead society out of capitalism, to overturn capitalism, it's got to do it with allies like the peasantry, the middle class. It's got to understand all that. So we've got to educate, as socialists, we've got to educate the working class. Yes, in the context of struggle, right? By leading them into struggle and by proclaiming the democratic nature of that struggle, right? And what the democratic tasks are, not hiding them. We've got to lead them in that. And the point is, consciousness comes by education about the whole of society. It comes from knowledge as well, not just from the limited experience of the working class itself in its own struggle. I'm not against that, but that's what comrades have been saying. They've been saying the working class will learn they'll learn by studying. They'll learn by studying all classes. They'll learn from other classes, and they'll win people from other classes as well onto their side to implement the working class program for socialism. I was puzzled by a few things. Nina Houghton said, if she's still here, somehow she put in chat that version 2 seems to rest on the assumption that LLA members will leave the Labour Party. Well, I don't know. That's not my perspective. My perspective is to stay, and not to. I've actually accused version 2, haven't I, of being exitist. Well, really, I actually accused Dave's Brighton motion 4.5 of being entryist, exitist, because he says we're not talking about moving on from Labour at this stage. Well, that's right. We shouldn't talk about moving on from it at all. And I noticed that people are talking about loads of people are leaving Labour. I tell you what, there's loads more staying in. There's loads more staying in. I looked at that report by the NEC Left. That means John Landsman and co, I know. But the 6 of them got together and gave us a report of the June and July meetings of the NEC. And there you find that the Labour Party membership is something like 570,000. So there was an influx from the right, wasn't there, in support of Starmer, and people joining because they thought he might win, and then he did win. But they can't mobilise the same. Corbyn intake was hundreds of thousands. The maximum anyone guessed for Starmer intake is perhaps, you know, they might get up to 100,000, but even that's doubtful. I'm afraid there's loads of socialists in the Labour Party, maybe pissed off, maybe silenced and so on. And they're not all leaving, right? Some of them are leaving. Some of them are being cowed. Some are being pulled to the right. Others are being upset and made into, you know, radicalised, if you like, in the good sense. So we've got that to deal with, you know. Daniel's...
Wind up now, Stan, please.
I'll wind up. Daniel's bit about how to improve lives now as soon as possible. Well, I only wish, you know, but we'll only do it if we actually take the task seriously. It can't be presentation above content, right? And connecting with the concrete. Well, if you talk about Extinction Rebellion, for example, the planet crisis, the environmental crisis, that's connecting with youth today. You've got to say capitalism's the problem. Let's dump it, right? And the working class is the only way to do it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stan. I did enjoy that discussion. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Just to mind.